So imagine you are a Bedouin goat herder.
Okay.
You're living in these sweeping, echoing canyons of the Jordanian desert. And for generations, I mean, stretching back way further than anyone can even remember, your family has survived this incredibly harsh landscape.
Right. Using just profound, deeply rooted ecological knowledge.
Exactly. And crucially, your family has never owned a single camel.
Not one.
Right? Because the rocky, vertical terrain of your ancestral home, it isn't suited for them. But tomorrow morning, you are going to wake up, walk down to the local market, and you're going to spend a huge amount of money to buy a camel.
Which makes zero logical sense historically.
Zero. So why do it? You do it because thousands of tourists from places like New York, London, Tokyo, they're arriving next week. And they have this very specific expectation in their heads of what a quote-unquote real Bedouin looks like.
Yeah, if you don't have a camel, they literally don't think you are authentic.
Exactly. And that wild contradiction is where we are starting today. So, welcome everyone to the official deep dive of our travel social app. Today we're exploring these curated realities, the ancient survivals, and the intense linguistic battlegrounds of global travel.
That goat herder buying a camel is just the perfect entry point, I think. Because it really forces you to realize that a destination, it isn't just some static postcard. It's this highly reactive living organism.
It is, and that realization, that is the beating heart of what we're doing here today. This entire deep dive is built heavily around the philosophy of Yarub Aljaarat.
Our CEO and founder.
Right, and we want to explicitly welcome Yarub at the very top of this show, because his vision for community-driven, deeply informed, and just intensely mindful travel, that's the whole foundation of our analysis here.
Yeah, his vision is really built on this core belief that you don't just move through a space, You have to actively seek to understand it. You seek to understand the people, the hidden layers, and those really complex socioeconomic forces that are quite literally shaking the ground you're walking on.
Exactly. And to help navigate all this complexity, we are utilizing the expertise of two AI personas today.
Yeah.
You can sort of think of the first framework as Nick, an expert in travel experience, socioeconomic impacts, and ambassador programs.
And the second conceptual framework is Sophia, focusing on travel experience, spatial geography, and design. And by blending these two analytical lenses, we're basically going to guide you through this massive stack of sources to shortcut your path to being a truly well-informed traveler.
And it is a dense stack today. I mean, we're pulling from academic sociological papers, UNESCO intangible cultural heritage reports, news articles,
Historical analyses of the Arab Revolt.
yeah, and even this massive sociolinguistic study on how street signs dictate cultural identity. Our mission here is to basically extract a masterclass on how physical landscapes, ancient nomadic tribes, shifting languages, and modern global tourism all just kind of violently and beautifully intersect in southern Jordan.
We are looking at how a landscape dictates the survival of a people, how they adapt across millennia, and ultimately how your actual physical presence as a modern traveler fundamentally alters their reality in real time.
Right. So before we can even begin to understand the modern travel experience in Jordan or, figure out why a goat herder is buying a camel, we really have to look at the physical and historical landscape that birthed this whole ecosystem.
You have to start at the water.
You do. If you look at a map of the region, everything converges at this single coastal point. We have to start in Aqaba.
And if you want to understand Aqaba, you really have to discard this idea of it just being like a modern resort town on the Red Sea, because heritage researchers actually describe this specific piece of geography as a spatio-temporal window.
Which sounds incredibly academic.
Very academic, yeah. But it is the most precise way to describe it. Because of its unique geography, Aqaba sits directly at this intense topographical bottleneck. It's the crossroads of three major regions.
You've got the Hijaz to the south.
Right. And the Levant, or Sham, to the north, and then Egypt over to the west. Think about the actual mechanics of ancient movement here.
Was it easy?
No, not at all. If you were an empire moving spices or armies or religious ideas across this part of the world, you couldn't just, walk in a straight line.
Because of the deserts.
Exactly. The impassable deserts and massive mountain ranges. Geography literally forced you to funnel through Aqaba. So this bottleneck means that for thousands of years, pretty much the entirety of human civilization was constantly marching through this one specific window.
And the timeline in these archaeological sources is just, it's frankly staggering. When you walk through Aqaba today, you're not just walking past some old buildings, you are literally walking over tall Amakas.
Which is a Chalcolithic site.
Right, dating back roughly 6,000 years. I mean, we
Hmm.
are talking about the Copper Age here. People were smelting copper in this exact spot millennia before the Roman Empire even existed.
Yeah, and then you just step forward a bit in time and you hit Edomite Ayla from the Bronze Age around 150 BC.
And the layers just don't stop. They keep accumulating.
They really do. You've got what archaeologists consider to be one of the oldest purpose-built Byzantine mud brick churches in the entire world.
Wow.
And then just a few streets over, you find the ruins of Islamic Ayla, which served as basically the very first model of an early Islamic city built outside the Arabian Peninsula.
And then towering over the coastline, you have the imposing stone architecture of the Mamluk-era Aqaba Castle. And right alongside all these massive stone monuments, you have the Hafair,
Palm groves.
right? These traditional, deeply rooted agricultural palm groves. Instead of using that, that tired cultural layer cake metaphor.
Right, it's overused.
Yeah, reading through these sources actually makes me think of Aqaba more like an ancient archaeological hard drive.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's like a hard drive that's been continuously overwritten by 5 different major empires over 6,000 years, but it was never actually wiped clean.
Yeah.
You can still access these sort of corrupted files of the pharaohs, the Nabateans, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Hijaz. They all left their code behind.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And what's really fascinating is how this overwritten hard drive creates a completely unique cultural operating system for the local people there today. It creates this 3-part harmony in their folklore, their daily life, their economy.
So break that down. What are the 3 parts?
First, because it's fundamentally a coastal city, the heritage is deeply saturated with the sea. So you have centuries of fishing lore, coral harvesting, maritime trade.
And that shows up in the music, right?
Heavily. The traditional music of the coast relies on these specific maritime instruments like the simsimia.
Which is,
It's this beautiful multi-stringed lyre used by sailors, and it's usually accompanied by the mirwas, which is a small double-sided drum.
but then, if you just turn your back to the sea and look inland, the coastal plain immediately crashes into these harsh, arid mountains of the desert. I mean, it's nestled right between the Sinai, Wadi Rum, the Hijaz, and the Levant deserts.
Right, so while the people have this really deep maritime culture, their dialect, their traditional clothing, and their communal dances, they reflect a very deep, undeniable Bedouin character.
Like the Sajja dance.
Exactly. And when they perform these desert traditions, instead of that sea lyre, you hear the rebab,
Or rebab, yeah.
the single-stringed, mournful instrument of the nomadic herder.
And then you add the third layer, right? The rural aspect, the Hafair palm groves. The sources note that the locals historically utilized this incredibly efficient circular agricultural economy. I mean, they used literally every single part of the palm tree.
Nothing was wasted.
Nothing. The dates were for food, the fronds were for weaving baskets and housing materials, the trunks were used for structural furniture. It's just total utilization.
So you have the sea merchants, the desert nomads, and the rural farmers all occupying the exact same geographical bottleneck.
Right. But this raises a really important structural question, and I kind of want to push back on this a little
Sure.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
If a city has so many differing, intense influences just violently pulling at it, right? You've got maritime traders looking outward to the ocean, nomadic Bedouins looking outward to the deep desert, and rural farmers who are tethered to their palm groves.
Yeah.
How does it not just completely fracture?
Yeah.
How does it maintain a cohesive Aqabawi identity rather than just feeling like, a fragmented collection of different demographics who just happen to share a zip code?
That is basically the core question of urban sociology right
Mhm.
there. And the answer really lies in the harsh mechanics of survival. In a landscape, this unforgiving fragmentation is just a death sentence.
You literally can't survive alone.
Exactly. The cohesion you see in Aqaba comes from absolute, undeniable interdependence. Think about it. The sea merchants who brought spices and silks from India, they couldn't move those goods to Damascus without the Bedouin.
Because the Bedouin were the only ones who knew how to navigate the desert.
Exactly. It's a lethal, waterless interior. But the Bedouin, in turn, needed the rural farmers for reliable calories. They needed those dates and agricultural products to survive the dry seasons.
And the farmers needed the sea merchants.
Right, for imported tools and broader economic trade. This deep economic interdependence forged this synthesized cultural identity over centuries. You literally couldn't afford to isolate your community because you relied on the other two to keep you alive.
And the heritage researcher, Abdullah Manzalawi, he emphasizes this explicitly in the sources. He says that despite these radically diverse inputs, Aqaba's heritage remains incredibly distinct and culturally homogenous today.
The music, the food, the dialect, it's all a perfect blend of those three survival strategies.
They just needed each other to survive the landscape. And speaking of surviving the landscape, let's actually follow those trade routes inland for a minute. Let's move from the physical geography of the coast to the people who actually mastered navigating that deep, lethal interior.
The Bedouin tribes.
Yes, specifically the Huitat Confederation.
Yeah, to understand the Huitat is really to understand the absolute mastery of an unforgiving ecosystem. We are talking about a prominent, incredibly powerful confederation of Bedouin tribes.
And their territory was huge.
They're massive. Their traditional territories span this arid footprint covering southern Jordan, northwestern Saudi Arabia, and the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. If you were moving through this territory historically, you were moving purely at their discretion.
Right away in the academic sources, though, there's this really fascinating tension regarding their actual origins.
Yeah.
When you ask the Huitat about their history, they claim a Hashemite Ashraf lineage,
Right.
which means their oral histories trace their noble Arab ancestry all the way back to Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes, and identifying as Sharif, meaning noble descendants of the Prophet, that is a highly significant sociological marker. It distinguishes them from many other Bedouin groups in the region who trace their roots to ancient Qahtani or Adani Arab stocks, but without those direct prophetic ties.
It's a status thing.
A huge status thing. Historically, claiming this specific religious and noble lineage carried immense geopolitical prestige, especially when it came to, intertribal alliances, negotiating grazing rights, and dealing with the political administration of the Ottoman Empire.
But the empirical historical research, it points to a mechanism of origin that's a bit more pragmatic, doesn't it? The historians in our source stack kind of trace a completely different path.
They do, and what's fascinating here is the intersection of verifiable pastoral adaptation and aspirational narrative.
Right.
Empirical evidence actually situates the tribe's early roots among Hijazi nomadic confederations in northwestern Arabia. So they emerged primarily as camel pastoralists by the late medieval period.
So they were exploiting the arid steppes for herding.
Exactly, and essentially running and taxing the caravan routes from Mecca up to Aqaba. 16th century Ottoman geographers placed them very firmly in the northern Hijaz.
But then they moved.
Yeah, as pastures depleted over generations, and as traditional trade got disrupted under Mamluk and later Ottoman rule, severe economic imperatives pushed them slowly northward into Transjordan.
So whether their bloodline literally goes back to the Prophet, or whether they were, medieval camel herders who slowly migrated north for better grass, what we know for sure is that they organized their entire society in a way that was brilliantly designed to keep them alive.
In a place where water is scarce and the sun is just relentless.
Exactly. Let's unpack how they actually govern themselves.
Their tribal structure is basically a masterclass in arid zone survival mechanics. It's built on a hierarchical structure of patrilineal kinship. The massive confederation divides into principal branches or subclans.
Like the Abutai, the Imjazi, and the Anjadat.
Right. Now, to an outsider, this just looks like a complex family tree. But structurally, it's a highly sophisticated system for resource allocation, collective decision-making, and most importantly, mutual defense.
Let's dig into that defense aspect, because this is the exact moment where the Huitat violently enter the global historical stage. I'm talking about the Arab Revolt.
1916 to 1918.
Yeah. When most people hear Arab Revolt, they immediately picture the 1962 Hollywood epic Lawrence of Arabia.
Of course.
You picture Peter O'Toole riding across these sweeping cinematic dunes, uniting the noble, untamed desert warriors for this grand ideological cause of Arab freedom.
The romanticized Western lens on this specific piece of history is incredibly strong. It's heavily influenced by T.E. Lawrence's own, frankly, highly dramatized book, Seven Pillars of Wisdom.
Right.
But when you strip away the cinematic score and look at the actual historical sources and military dispatches, the reality is much grittier. It's far more transactional and infinitely more tactical.
The sources highlight one specific subclan, the Abutai, led by Sheikh Atta Abutai. This man was just a living legend.
Lawrence himself described Atta as the preeminent warrior leader of northern Arabia.
And the sources casually drop this detail that Atta was elected sheikh not just because of his bloodline, but because he personally had 75 confirmed kills in intertribal skirmishes.
Which is wild.
Yeah, 75.
But that detail regarding his combat record is crucial to understanding Bedouin governance. Leadership among the Huaytat was not based on rigid primogeniture.
Like the eldest son automatically inherits the throne, like in European monarchies?
Exactly. No, it was entirely merit-based. Sheikhs were elected by a consensus of tribal elders based on two things. First, demonstrated valor and tactical brilliance in combat, and second, their ability to mediate internal disputes.
In the deep desert, you don't follow a king because of a birth certificate.
No, you follow the commander who has proven he can secure water, protect the herds, and keep you alive.
So, Auda Abutai, this brilliant, battle-hardened tactician, he forges an alliance with Sharif Hussein's forces and the British, represented by T.E. Lawrence.
Right.
And together, they pull off one of the most legendary military maneuvers of the 20th century, the inland assault on Aqaba in July 1917.
It's incredible.
The Ottoman Empire had heavily fortified Aqaba, but all their massive naval guns were pointed out toward the Red Sea, expecting a British amphibious assault. They didn't expect an attack from the desert behind them because the desert was considered completely impassable for an army.
Which is exactly why Awado chose that route.
Naturally.
They executed this grueling 260-mile trek through one of the most hostile environments on Earth. They started from Wedge, looped deep into the desert, overran isolated Ottoman outposts, and then just swept down into Aqaba from the mountains.
They basically captured the city from behind, entirely neutralizing the coastal defenses, and opened up this massive, vital supply route for the British military.
It is an astonishing tactical achievement. Moving hundreds of men and camels 260 miles through the summer heat that requires a logistical genius that a traditional European general simply wouldn't possess.
We have to look at why the Huaytat actually did it.
Yeah.
The Hollywood depiction assumes this was driven by, a deep, burning ideological allegiance to pan-Arab unity and the destruction of empires. But the historical dispatches show it was deeply, fundamentally pragmatic.
Absolutely. When you live in an ecosystem where resources are finite, pure ideology is a luxury you literally cannot afford. Survival dictates your politics.
So why did they fight?
The Huaytat joined the revolt to evade brutal Ottoman conscription policies that were just taking all their young men. They were fighting to escape heavy, crippling taxation on their herds. They were seeking strategic revenge for prior Ottoman military encroachments on their ancestral pastoral lands.
And loot?
Yes, quite frankly, they were heavily motivated by the prospect of lucrative loot from raiding the supply trains of the Hejaz Railway.
I have to say, I find the actual history so much more compelling than the Hollywood fantasy.
Just so much richer.
It completely challenges that romanticized Western view of the noble savage fighting for some glowing, abstract ideal. I mean, wasn't this intense tactical pragmatism actually just a brilliant continuation of their survival strategy?
It was geopolitics executed at a tribal level. Oda's alliance with the British provided his tribe with gold sovereigns, captured modern weaponry, and a really powerful political buffer against rival tribes in the region, like the Bani Sakr.
They were playing chess.
Three-dimensional chess. The historical records even show that they meticulously negotiated equitable shares of captured livestock and weapons before agreeing to execute specific raids.
Wow.
It was a calculated, highly effective military and economic strategy executed by people who understood the lethal mechanics of the desert better than anyone else on Earth.
Okay, so we have established that these are fierce, highly pragmatic, nomadic warriors who essentially broke the back of the Ottoman Empire's hold on the Red Sea through sheer desert mastery.
Right.
But let's fast forward a century. How do the descendants of these warriors adapt to the modern world? They obviously can't sustain an economy by raiding trains and leading camel caravans forever.
Right, which brings us to a monumental societal shift. The transition from nomadic pastoralism to modern sedentarization and eventually to the tourism economy. Over the last century, the Bedouin tribes have undergone a massive rewiring of their entire way of life. In the early 20th century, nomadic mobility moving herds across vast distances with the seasons, it was near universal.
Almost everybody did it.
But by the 1980s, that nomadic mobility had plummeted to under 10%.
From nearly 100% to under 10%. That is a total societal collapse of the old ways in just a few generations. What was the mechanism behind that sudden stop? Why did they stop moving?
Well, it wasn't a sudden amnesia of their culture. It was driven by aggressive state integration. The formation of the modern state of Transjordan in the 1920s fundamentally changed the economic incentives.
How so?
Tribal members were heavily recruited into the nascent state security forces, specifically the famous Arab Legion.
Okay.
This provided young men with steady, reliable cash salaries, which immediately reduced the economic need for, precarious caravan raiding or relying solely on unpredictable rainfall for the herds.
That makes total sense. Cash is more reliable than rain?
Exactly. Furthermore, the modern state actively implemented policies to settle the nomads. They provided subsidized concrete housing, they built schools, established healthcare clinics, and began fencing off traditional grazing lands for agricultural development.
So sedentary life simply became safer, more predictable, and more economically viable than constantly moving.
Exactly.
But even though they moved into concrete houses, you still have this deep, ancestral, psychological tie to the landscape, which is exactly where the tourism economy just explodes into the picture.
Right.
You have tribes like the Ziwe and Zelabai and the towering sandstone valleys of Wadi Rum, and the Bedouin and Liathni tribes living among the ancient Nabatean ruins of Petra.
Yeah.
They transitioned their primary economic engine. Instead of guiding caravans of spices and silks across the dunes, they begin guiding caravans of global tourists.
And this transition introduces a highly complex, sometimes, really problematic dynamic that sociologists refer to as the neo-Orientalist vision.
This is exactly what we were talking about at the very beginning with the goat herder. I want to unpack this neo-Orientalism concept deeply because it completely changes how you view a vacation. Explain the mechanics of this.
When global tourists book a flight to Jordan and travel to Wadi Rum or Petra, they arrive with a preconceived, heavily curated image already in their heads.
The Lawrence of Arabia image.
Right. They've seen the movies, they've seen the Instagram posts. They want to experience the untouched, ancient, pristine desert dweller.
But the reality is, the modern Bedouin drive pickup trucks, use smartphones, and live in houses.
Exactly. So in response to this massive economic demand for an authentic past, the tribes begin to commodify their own culture. They curate an artificial authenticity that matches the tourist's expectation, even if it directly contradicts their actual historical reality.
The most striking example of this in the research stack centers on the Bedouin tribe in Petra. Historically, as we mentioned, the Bedouin were exclusively goat herders.
Right.
They didn't really use camels. The rocky, steep terrain of the Petra valleys wasn't right for them. But recently, local Bedouin businessmen started buying camels. Why? Because tourists arrive in the desert from Europe or America and immediately ask, where are the camels?
It's a fascinating, almost closed loop of supply and demand actively shaping cultural expression. The tourists expect camels because of Western media stereotypes, so the Bedouin buy camels to perform Bedouinness for the tourists.
Which then reinforces the stereotype for the next wave of tourists.
Exactly.
It's like a lifelong city dweller buying cowboy hat, some spurs, and a lasso to run a dude ranch in Montana, specifically for tourists visiting from New York who want to feel like they're in a Western movie.
That's a perfect comparison.
It's a highly curated authenticity. But I have to ask this, based on your frameworks. Are the locals fundamentally losing their true culture by doing this? Or is this adaptation just the exact same brutal pragmatism that Auda Abu Tayi used 100 years ago? I mean, is performing for tourists just the latest evolutionary step of Bedouin survival?
That exact question is the central debate among anthropologists studying the region today. Some argue forcefully that it degrades and cheapens the intangible heritage, turning a proud way of life into a hollow theme park.
Right.
But others point out that rapid adaptation is the very core of Bedouin identity. Surviving the desert used to mean finding hidden water sources. Surviving the desert today means navigating the algorithms of the global tourism market.
That's incredibly profound. Surviving the algorithm instead of the drought.
Yeah. What is undeniable, however, is how this massive economic shift alters internal social structures, particularly when we look at gender dynamics. The influx of tourist capital doesn't affect everyone equally.
Right. The sources highlight a stark, fascinating contrast between different tribes regarding how women are integrating into this new workforce. In Petra, you have Bedouin women actively and visibly working in the tourism sector.
Very visibly.
They're setting up stalls, selling souvenirs, pouring tea, and interacting directly with international visitors. And crucially, they are doing this inside the very ancient caves their families actually used to live in before the government relocated them to a nearby purpose-built village.
The spatial geography in that specific example is the key to understanding the cultural permission. Because these Bedouin women are working in their ancestral home, the Petra Valley, the traditional cultural barrier against women working in the public sphere is significantly lowered.
Because it's technically not the public sphere to them.
Exactly. Psychologically and spatially, they are still conceptually at home, hosting guests in their own territory.
That's fascinating.
Conversely, look at the spatial dynamics of the Amerindian tribe near Little Petra. They run these elaborate, highly produced Bedouin nights for tourists out in the desert. We're talking massive feasts, live music, dancing around fire pits. But during these events, the men completely run the show. The women are kept entirely in the background, out of sight, baking bread in closed-off areas. The spatial setup of a commercial tourist camp doesn't offer the same cultural protection as an ancestral cave.
And the research actually noted a specific, highly tense interaction where tourists at one of these camps tried to wander back and take photos of the women baking bread.
Oh, yeah.
It created this incredibly awkward, uncomfortable tension. The private, protected sphere of the women was being aggressively violated by the relentless tourist gaze.
Exactly. The tourist assumes all spaces are consumable, while the host maintains strict cultural boundaries. And it's not just gender roles that are shifting under this pressure. Deeply held, ancient religious traditions are also fading from the landscape.
Tell me more about that.
Historically, the Bedouin practiced the veneration of local saints, known as Alea. They would make these massive, annual, communal pilgrimages to holy tombs scattered across the desert. They'd offer sacrifices and prayers for rain, health, and the fertility of their herds.
So it was a massive social event that bound the disparate tribes together.
Yes.
But the sociologists in our sources show that these ancient practices are declining rapidly. Why the sudden drop-off in the last few decades?
There are really two main mechanisms driving this cultural loss. First, the younger generation is being educated in modern state schools and attending modern mosques, where they are embracing a more orthodox, standardized version of Islam.
Right.
This orthodox view often strictly forbids the old tomb veneration. It frames it as backward, superstitious, or even bordering on pagan polytheism.
And the second mechanism.
The younger generation's economic focus is entirely reoriented. They don't need rain for a herd of goats anymore.
They need good reviews on TripAdvisor for their Jeep tour.
Exactly. The desert is no longer viewed as a terrifying, sacred landscape requiring spiritual intercession for survival. It has been rezoned into a commercial asset.
The landscape itself literally changes from a sacred space to a workspace, which brings us directly back to the core of Yarub Aljaarat's vision for our travel app. We are looking at how modern tourism physically manifests these massive cultural shifts to create immersive experiences for today's traveler.
Right.
If you are a user on our app looking to find the real Jordan, what are you actually experiencing when you book a tour?
The tourism industry in Jordan has evolved far beyond just, pointing at old rocks. It has become incredibly sophisticated at designing highly immersive, emotionally resonant products. Let's look at two specific, contrasting examples from the sources.
Okay.
First, there is the excursion with a Bedouin shepherd located in the DC region.
Oh, this one jumped out at me in the reading. It sounded amazing. It's an initiative run entirely by the DC Women's Cooperative.
Yeah.
You don't just go sit in a tent and look at the desert. You go out into the active landscape with a local shepherd. The women teach you the actual mechanics of their historical survival.
You learn how to properly milk a sheep and a camel. You learn how to play the traditional Bedouin musical instruments that are specifically used to calm and direct the grazing flocks.
What is highly critical about this specific experience is its underlying environmental and cultural philosophy. It intentionally maintains the historically low-impact ethos of traditional Bedouin life.
Exactly. The spatial footprint is minimal. You carry only what you need, you eat a modest, locally sourced meal, and when the excursion is over and you leave the valley, the only physical trace left behind is the ashes of your small campfire.
It is tourism designed to leave no scar on the landscape.
It's a beautiful, really intimate scale of travel. But then, if you look at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the sources detail the revival of the Hejaz Railway in Wadi Rum.
Oh, wow. This is not a quiet walk with a shepherd. This is a massive, highly capitalized, highly produced undertaking. Yes, the Jordanian Heritage Revival Company has engineered a massive spectacle. They have created a 10-kilometer interactive train journey. You aren't just looking at history. You are physically boarding actual vintage train carriages pulled by massive whistling steam locomotives.
Which is so cool.
And as you travel through the towering red mountains of Wadi Rum, you are suddenly immersed in a full theatrical reenactment of the Arab Revolt.
I mean, the descriptions are wild. We are talking about train whistles blowing, dozens of horses galloping alongside the carriages at full speed.
It's intense.
You have local actors in full 1917 period costume engaging in mock firefights with blank ammunition, depicting the historical clashes between the Ottoman forces and the Arab freedom fighters.
It's part of this much larger state-sponsored Renaissance Triangle project linking the historical and tourist sites in Makan, Aqaba, and Wadi Rum.
And the socioeconomic impact of this massive production is substantial, right? It's not just a fleeting piece of entertainment. Not at all. It serves as a major training ground for local youth, teaching them skills in acting, complex event management, logistics, and tour guiding. It boosted daytime tourism metrics significantly by packaging the train ride with extensive 4x4 desert tours and traditional zarb cooking.
Which is that communal feast where food is slow-cooked in a specialized underground earth oven, right?
Yes, exactly. And the data shows that between 2022 and 2024, this specific experience brought in 48,000 visitors from 124 different countries.
Wow.
That extends the duration of tourist stays, which injects massive critical capital into the local economy.
So you have 48,000 people from 124 countries sitting in a vintage train experiencing a literal theatrical reenactment of a brutal war.
Yeah.
I have to push back here because this raises a massive ethical question for the traveler. Does an interactive theatrical shootout cross the line into a theme park experience?
The fair question.
We talked earlier about curated authenticity. At what point does a travel experience stop being a genuinely authentic engagement with a culture and just become a really well-produced hollow show?
That is arguably the defining ethical tension of modern cultural tourism. And to understand it, it forces us to examine the ancient concept of karam.
Which is hospitality.
Right, the deeply ingrained, almost sacred Bedouin value of hospitality. Historically, karam wasn't just about being polite. It was a fundamental survival mechanism on the lethal step.
Like we said earlier.
You host a stranger today, you feed them, you protect them, because next month you might be the stranger dying of thirst in their territory. It was an absolute, non-negotiable obligation of honor.
But now that sacred obligation of honor is a line item on a commercial invoice.
Precisely. How does a proud tribe balance the profound historical cultural honor of hosting a guest with the raw capitalistic reality of charging a tourist $50 for the tea in the tent?
That's tough.
The theatrical train ride is clearly, undeniably a performance. But perhaps we need to redefine authenticity. Perhaps the authenticity doesn't lie in the historical accuracy of the blank bullets being fired. Perhaps the deep authenticity lies in the fact that a young man from Wadi Rum is utilizing the story of his own ancestor survival to feed his family in the 21st century.
Wow. That entirely reframes the experience. Okay,
Yeah.
so you have these 124 nationalities pouring into the region, experiencing these highly curated realities and injecting millions of dollars into the local economy. But an influx of that many global citizens doesn't just change the local bank accounts.
No, it changes everything.
It physically and visibly alters the infrastructure, the streets, the signs, and the very language of the cities they travel through. Let's head back to the coast, back to Aqaba, and look at how this global collision is rewriting the linguistic landscape.
We just saw how Bedouin tribes commodified our history for global tourists in the desert. But that exact same collision between local heritage and global capital is literally rewriting the visual landscape of the city streets.
Through signage.
Yes. We have incredible data from a massive, highly detailed sociolinguistic study analyzing exactly 1,810 commercial storefront signs across 6 major commercial streets in Aqaba.
1,810 signs. That is a ton of data.
It is, and the researchers didn't just walk by and tally the signs. They conducted deep interviews with 42 local residents of vastly differing ages, genders, and socioeconomic backgrounds to understand exactly how they felt about the visual language dominating their city.
And the study focuses heavily on the visual tension between Roman script, meaning English letters, versus traditional Arabic script. We are talking about the massive, towering logos of global brands like GAP, Levi's, McDonald's, Starbucks, Canon.
Right, and what this study uncovers is a stark, almost aggressive generational divide in how these symbols are processed psychologically.
Break down the psychology of the youth demographic first, because for young Jordanians navigating the streets of Aqaba, English scripts and giant U.S. brand logos are not just markers of places to buy coffee or jeans.
No, they function as potent, visual symbols of cosmopolitanism, modernity, and a connection to a broader, liberal, global lifestyle.
The actual interviews detailed in the study are incredibly revealing here. To a young person in Aqaba, a Starbucks isn't just a place to get an overpriced latte. The study points out that traditional Jordanian society still maintains fairly strict cultural norms regarding gender segregation in public spaces.
Exactly.
But a Starbucks, heavily branded with Western aesthetics and Roman script, it represents a unique social space that subtly but powerfully defies those traditional boundaries. It's viewed by the youth as a safe, modern zone where young men and women can mingle more freely.
Protected under the cultural umbrella of globalized coffee culture,
Right.
the brand essentially provides a microenvironment of perceived Western liberty within a traditional city. And similarly, international clothing brands like GAP and Levi's represent a desperate desire to connect with global fashion, internet culture, and progress.
One young respondent in the study explicitly stated that wearing these specific brands makes them feel like they're physically living in a different, more advanced country. To them, the Roman script itself visually signals high quality, coolness, and escape.
But then, the researchers interview the older generation living on the exact same street.
And they are existing in a completely different psychological universe.
Completely opposed. The older generation views these exact same glowing signs through the strict lens of linguistic nationalism and deep religious identity.
It's an invasion to them.
Exactly. To them, the aggressive encroachment of giant English letters is not a sign of progress. It is a direct existential threat to Arabic, which is intimately and sacredly tied to their identity as the chosen language of the Quran.
They look up and see a massive McDonald's sign, and they don't see a convenient place for a quick burger. They see an unwanted, invasive cultural import.
They explicitly associate that fast food logo with the breakdown of traditional communal family meals, the rise of individualism, and the introduction of inappropriate social mingling between genders.
They literally view the physical English letters as an invasion of foreign values overriding their culture.
And this intense, simmering street-level tension gives rise to some absolutely brilliant linguistic adaptations by local businesses trying to survive.
I love this part of the study.
The study categorizes hybrid and local brands that try to carefully navigate this cultural minefield. A perfect example is the Jordanian telecom company, Umniya.
Umnai is an Arabic word meaning wish, right?
Yes, wish. But on their massive street signs, the word is written entirely using Romanized English characters.
Romanized Arabic. It's such a brilliant, subversive marketing tactic.
It is a masterstroke of cultural navigation. The company deliberately uses the Roman alphabet to directly appeal to the tech-savvy youth demographic.
Who are already entirely accustomed to texting each other in Roman characters on their smartphones.
Exactly, often using numbers to represent Arabic sounds not found in English. By using Roman script, the brand signals that they are a modern, progressive, hyper-connected telecom company.
But phonetically, when read out loud, they are preserving the local traditional Arabic word. So they are appeasing the local culture at the same time.
It plays both sides perfectly.
And then you have local brands taking the complete opposite approach, like Al-Ghazal, which sells agricultural products. Their storefront sign is written purely in massive Arabic calligraphy, featuring visual iconography of a soaring deer and a sunflower.
It invokes deep, unapologetic, local pride.
Entirely rejecting the corporate pressure to look Western in order to signify equality. And then you have a brand like Saeda, a popular clothing store, which attempts to literally play both sides by writing its name in massive Roman script with a smaller Arabic translation underneath.
The Saeda example is fascinating because of the irony involved. It is a brand explicitly selling traditional conservative Islamic clothing for women.
Right.
But they deliberately use the Roman script to elevate the brand's perceived prestige, making their storefront look like an international fashion house on a street in Milan, while keeping its religious and cultural roots anchored with the Arabic translation underneath.
It's like the city's billboards and neon signs are engaged in this silent, high-stakes linguistic tug-of-war. On one side, you have the deep gravitational pull of traditional roots, the family structure, and the Quran. And on the other side, you have this desperate, energetic reach outward to the globe, to the internet, and to cosmopolitan freedom.
It's a visual battleground.
But let me ask you to analyze this. When a sign like Umnaya uses Romanized Arabic, is that ultimately a surrender to Western globalization? Or is it actually a brilliant, linguistic hack by the youth to make their language globally accessible while preserving the phonetic soul of the word.
From a sociolinguistic perspective, I would argue it is absolutely the latter. It is an act of profound linguistic resilience.
Resilience, not surrender.
Right. They aren't abandoning their language to adopt an English word. They are aggressively forcing the global alphabet to speak Arabic.
Huh.
It is a modern synthesis, functioning much like the ancient synthesis of the sea, the desert, and the farm we saw in Aqaba's early 6,000-year history. It is cultural adaptation happening in real time.
Okay, so everywhere we look in Jordan, we see this incredibly careful, sometimes messy, negotiation. You have ancient Bedouin tribes negotiating their heritage with modern tourists. You have traditional Arabic script negotiating space with English letters. It is constant dialogue.
Yeah.
But let's look at how this collision between heritage and rapid modernization is playing out on an unprecedented scale right across the border. If you look south into Saudi Arabia, that careful negotiation is entirely ruptured by a project of just staggering magnitude.
Yes. This brings us to the complex, highly publicized conflict surrounding the megacity project in Saudi Arabia's Tabuk province.
We must be very clear about our methodology here. Our goal is to impartially report the stark facts and the conflicting narratives exactly as they are laid out in the historical, journalistic, and human rights sources provided in our stack.
Absolutely.
We are examining how a massive, futuristic development impacts the very same Hutat tribe we discussed earlier, who have grazed these specific lands for centuries.
To comprehend the conflict, you first have to comprehend the sheer, almost unimaginable scale of the development. NEOM is a $500 billion mega project championed by the Saudi Crown Prince.
$500 billion.
Yes. It serves as the absolute centerpiece of Vision 2030, which is this massive state initiative designed to rapidly transition the country's economy away from its historical dependence on oil by building a global hub for technology, tourism, and innovation.
So what does it actually look like?
NEOM is envisioned as a glittering, hyper-futuristic, fully sustainable megacity spanning an incredible 26,500 square kilometers along the Red Sea coast.
To put 26,500 square kilometers into perspective, that is roughly the size of the entire country of Belgium. It is utterly massive footprint.
Yes, it is.
And the core issue is that this massive footprint sits directly on top of the historical, ancestral territory of the Huaytat tribe. The physical construction of NEOM requires the planned relocation of an estimated 20,000 tribe members to clear the land for development.
And this is where the sources present two radically divergent, fundamentally opposed narratives regarding these relocations. Let's look at the state and pro-development narrative first.
Okay.
Saudi authorities, alongside several prominent official tribal leaders who have publicly endorsed the mega project, frame the relocations as a necessary, inevitable, and ultimately beneficial step for massive regional progress.
Right. The official state narrative strongly points to generous financial compensation frameworks being offered to the displaced families. These are often stated to be equivalent to or greater than the current property values of the traditional homes being demolished.
They also heavily emphasize the massive generational employment opportunities that a $500 billion tech and construction project will bring to an otherwise arid, historically underdeveloped region.
From this institutional perspective, the project is framed as a monumental economic boon that will lift the entire Tabuk region out of poverty and into the 21st century.
And supporters within the tribe and the government have publicly dismissed international critics as bankrupt outsiders or political dissidents motivated by envy and a desire to halt Saudi Arabia's progress. They argue that the relocations are largely voluntary and intricately tied to long-term national prosperity.
But then you turn the page in the source stack, and you have the activist and tribal resistance narrative, which presents a starkly different, highly alarming picture of the realities on the ground.
It does.
International human rights organizations, United Nations experts, and displaced locals claim this process is not a voluntary economic transition, but a systematic campaign of cultural erasure and forced evictions.
The absolute flashpoint of this resistance, which is widely documented in the sources, occurred in April 2020. It centered around the death of Abdul Rahim al-Huwaidi.
Tell us about it.
He was a prominent member of the Huaytat tribe who gained international attention by posting videos online, publicly refusing to vacate his ancestral property to make way for the bulldozers.
And what happened?
Activists and his immediate family describe his subsequent death as an extrajudicial execution carried out by state security forces during a peaceful protest against his eviction.
The official Saudi authorities, conversely, classified him in their reports as a dangerous terrorist suspect.
Right.
The state narrative asserts he had prior criminal convictions, possessed a massive cache of weapons, and was killed during a violent armed confrontation where he opened fire and endangered the lives of state security personnel.
Beyond this specific, highly contested tragedy, international human rights groups have documented what they claim are severe, draconian legal repercussions for any tribe members who resist or even question the project.
Yeah, the reports detail instances of tribe members receiving staggering prison sentences of up to 50 years simply for posting tweets protesting the evictions.
Some human rights organizations report that certain vocal activists have even faced the death penalty, tried under sweeping counterterrorism laws on charges of undermining national security and inciting rebellion.
The facts present a devastatingly complex situation. You have a powerful state aggressively pushing for a necessary post-oil, hyper-modern economic future, and an ancient indigenous nomadic population caught directly in the physical crosshairs of that towering ambition.
It really forces the informed traveler to acknowledge a difficult reality. The landscape you are admiring, whether it is a traditional Bedouin camp or a glittering, futuristic smart city, is never a blank canvas.
Never.
It is a territory continuously overwritten with complex human history. And sometimes the creation of the future involves the profound, painful displacement of the past. You must hold the architectural beauty of the destination and the stark reality of its creation in your mind simultaneously.
Which brings us back to the core mission of this deep dive. We've covered an incredible, exhaustive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started at the shores of Aqaba, looking through a 6,000-year-old spatiotemporal window, realizing that geography dictates destiny. We tracked the fiercely pragmatic Huaytat tribe, from medieval camel herders running caravans to tactical geniuses executing a 260-mile desert ambush to break the Ottoman Empire.
We examined the profound sociological mechanisms of how those same nomadic tribes adapted to the modern world. We saw them transition from moving herds to moving tourists, navigating the complex waters of Neo-Orientalism by commodifying their own traditions.
Buying camels to meet Western expectations.
Exactly, and shifting ancient gender roles to capture global capital. We analyzed the theatrical, highly produced revival of the Hejaz train, asking hard questions about the commercialization of sacred hospitality.
We read the visual language of the city streets, watching a fierce generational battle play out in neon over the preservation of the Arabic language versus the intoxicating allure of Western cosmopolitanism.
And finally, we confronted the staggering, monumental scale of hypermodernity with the NEOM project, examining the starkly divergent narratives of progress and displacement.
All of this incredible complexity ties directly back to Yarub Aljaarat's foundational vision for our travel app. True travel is never a passive act. It is not just about checking a box on an itinerary, taking a photo of a monument, and leaving.
Right.
It is about actively learning to read the street signs. It's about taking the time to understand the socioeconomic reasons why your Bedouin guide bought a camel when his grandfather only herded goats.
It is about grasping the immense, powerful, and sometimes invisible forces that are actively shaping the destination right before your eyes. When you use the app to connect with the community, you are engaging with a living ecosystem that is constantly reacting to your presence.
And that brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you with today. As modern global travelers, we are constantly, almost desperately seeking out the untouched, the authentic, the real historical experience.
Oh yeah, I want that.
But we have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, is our very presence, our demand for authenticity, the exact catalyst that forces these ancient cultures to transform themselves into a globalized performance?
It is the ultimate observer effect applied to human culture. When you travel to these ancient places, are you simply a passive observer of an ancient way of life? Or are you, in fact, the very reason that way of life is changing forever?
Something profound to mull over the next time you pack your bags and open the app. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and travel deeply.